You're listening to the Ayurveda Life School podcast, where we learn, explore, and discover the pathway to perfect health through 5,000 years of medical wisdom from mindfulness, Ayurveda, yoga, and secret healing traditions Western medicine has ignored. Join us as we journey on the path to perfect health. Now, your host, Ayurvedic health counselor, Heather Johnson. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Ayurveda Life School podcast. I'm so happy to have you here on episode number 40. That's so crazy to me that I've already recorded that many episodes to bring to you. I had a fun experience this weekend. We live near a professional basketball team named the Jazz. They play out of Salt Lake City, Utah. And my daughter plays on a basketball team called the Junior Jazz, and it's kind of like a recreational kids league. And as part of being in that league, they give you a free ticket to the game. So my husband and I decided it would be a great idea to take the entire team. He's their coach, and so we loaded up 7, 11, and 12-year-olds in our car and took them all to this game. Now, the tricky part of this game is that it didn't start until 8:30 at night, which is pretty late, but I guess when it's a televised game in Utah, that's pretty normal. But for me, that's really late to be just showing up at an event. And those games are long, like 2.5, 3 hours. So we were going to the game, and I anticipated that the girls would be tired and they probably wouldn't want to stay the whole game. And I thought, oh, it'll be fine. We'll just sneak out early. Well, the game was really close. They were playing the Portland Trail Blazers, and it was a good one, and it was down to the wire. And so about the mid-third quarter, they were still tied, and we asked the girls jokingly, hey, you guys ready to go yet? And they were like, no, we have to see the end of the game. Meanwhile, I am so exhausted because one of the habits that I have created since starting more of an Ayurvedic life is good sleep. And that includes being in bed with the lights out and asleep by 10 p.m. And so at this point, we're already well past 10 p.m. We're a good solid, 45 minutes or so from our house, and the game isn't even close to being done. And I'm sitting there just dying because I'm so not used to that. And I knew there would be ramifications. Like I knew that the impact of that would be negative, but I also knew it was important to me to be there with my daughter and have fun with her and her friends. And so I just kind of sucked it up and said, okay, I'm not quite dead yet. I can make it this whole evening. It will be fine. We got home well after midnight and had to be up early the next day for all of our regular routines. And it has taken about 4 or 5 days, and I'm still kind of off. And so what this led me to want to talk about today is something called Prajnaparadha. Prajnaparadha is one of the main causes of disease and suffering from an Ayurvedic standpoint. And so I wanted to unpack this concept and talk about how Prajnaparadha, or failure of the intellect, crimes against wisdom, willfully going against our inner knowing and acting against intuition and common sense, how that impacts our disease process and what we can do about it to help ourselves come back into healing and balance, and how we can start listening to that intuition just a little bit better. So as I just said, Prajnaparadha is the failure of the intellect. It's when you know that you should do something and instead you choose the opposite. Now it comes from a place of knowing, but you can also have the same effect on your body or your mind if you don't know that something is harmful for you and you choose it. But typically it means things that we know we should or should not do, and we willfully choose the opposite. So there's a lot of examples of this. When I was a kid growing up, fat-free diet was like all the rage. Everybody said, oh, if you eat fat-free, then you're going to be cutting fat from your body because you're cutting fat from your diet. So our family totally went onto that bandwagon. We were buying all of these desserts that were really high in sugar and very low or no fat, but the sugar was needed to make up for the taste that the fat wasn't providing because it wasn't in there. And we would make like pans of Rice Krispie treats and just down them. We'd buy these Entenmann's brownies that were fat-free, but they had so much sugar. Now I look back and just think, oh my goodness, it was insane. Well, through that time period, right in that same phase of life, my dad got diagnosed with diabetes. Now, I don't know if there was a direct cause and effect there. I think he'd had lifestyle habits that were negative for many years and had been really heavy. But it was just an interesting correlative time to see as we went through this whole, oh, if it's fat-free, I can totally eat it, and him getting diabetes because we had been eating tons and tons of sugar. So that was an example of Prajnaparadha where we really weren't tuning into our inner knowing and saying, the media might be saying that fat-free and having lots of sugar is fine, but do we really think that that's the right way to go? And we just kind of got swept up in that whole media hype and marketing hype about what was healthy instead of listening to our divine intuition about what was maybe better choice for us. So Prajnaparadha happens whenever one part of you insists on taking an action that is harmful to the rest of you. Some books or theories say that even cancerous cells are experiencing Prajnaparadha because they're failing to fulfill their divine destiny, and instead they're taking an action that's at the detriment of the rest of the body. Now, our intellect, the word in Sanskrit is prajna, it's inborn. It helps us to know what's best and most healthy for us to do in a given situation. But the problem is it's not acting in a vacuum. It's being used to make these decisions, but it's being influenced by both the ego and the soul or our higher self. So when we base our decisions on the past and we're learning from what happened, that's a good thing, right? Our intellect is using itself to make decisions and kind of evolving. It's growing and learning. When we're quiet, we usually know what that decision should be. Problem is, most of us are never quiet. Even right now, you're listening to this podcast and you might be driving, you might be exercising, you might be doing yard work, you might be doing something in your house, and you're not sitting in quiet. And I'm super grateful you're listening to this podcast. I hope you're enjoying it. But making sure we carve out space for quiet is very vital because that's what leads us to tapping into that prajna, that intellect. Often we don't listen, and some examples of when we don't listen would be staying up too late when we know we should get rest, but we feel like compelled to continue to work or to watch a TV show or to read a book or to do any number of things people do when they stay up past their bedtime. We should have a bedtime as adults. Or when we are full, but the food tastes so good, and so we just keep eating and eating and eating. Or we choose foods that we know will make us feel sick. It's when somebody like proactively takes a Xanax or a anti-acid medicine before they eat, knowing that what they eat is going to make them feel sick. That is like totally wisdom intellect failure. That is a crime against what you know to be right for your body. Or watching too much TV or using something else as a distraction or an avoidance. Now, what are we avoiding anyway? I like to call this buffering. Sometimes we choose activities because we're buffering from what our body is feeling or what our emotions are feeling. That is like cutting off our soul. That's cutting off our inner wisdom and knowing, and it's so easy to do. We might do this by choosing to eat a lot of food or to choose to eat food that is heavy and that is really sweet or that sits in our gut because it actually stops vibration of movement and emotion through the body. So if you have a negative emotion, like let's say you're feeling anxious and you don't want to feel that anymore, so you're eating to avoid the anxiety because the food blocks the energetic movement of the anxiety through the belly and through the body, so you don't feel it as much. You didn't actually solve the problem. You're still anxious underneath all that chocolate and food, but you think temporarily that you feel better. So that for me is buffering. It's putting a separation or a space between us and what we don't want to feel or what we don't want to do because of how that thing makes us feel when we do it. Maybe we have something scary we need to do for work. We have a phone call we need to make, and so we find every excuse to take a break. Maybe we'll go get some coffee, or maybe we'll go and call a friend. Maybe we'll browse our social media sites for a little bit. Maybe we'll just completely take it off our to-do list and pretend it doesn't even exist. So we're creating a buffer between us and the emotion that we think we'll feel if we take that action. Okay, so that's just a way of not listening to our soul and falling into that Prajnaparadha little trap, okay? Watching violent TV and movies. This can be a crime against our wisdom because it affects us. We might not think so, but it definitely has a vibrational impact on us. For me, it's swearing. I do not like curse words at all. And my kids just laugh at me because when we watch movies together, if there's a swear word in there, I have this like physical reaction where I literally make a sound like a like I gasp, and I feel this compelling need to cover my daughter's ears. I have one that's 7 years old, and I just want to hide and shield her from all the swearing. And I want to apologize to everyone as though somehow it was my fault that there was a swear word in this movie that we chose to watch. And it's so bad to the point that I do often tell us we have to turn off movies and we won't watch them. But it's me listening to that soul's voice that is literally offended by vulgar language. I just can't handle it. Gossiping, speaking untruths, or speaking too much are also examples of failure of the intellect. We know what we should or should not say in a situation based upon living true to ourselves. But when we say negative things about other people, we're actually violating that trust we have with ourselves and that trust they have with us. Same thing with when we speak an untruth or a lie. There is a vibrational shift in our body because that untruth is disharmonious with what is real, and we can actually feel that if we were tuned in. So that's also something that's a failure of the intellect. Simple things though, like not going to the bathroom when you need to, or suppressing bodily functions like needing to burp or flatulate or yawn. We want to listen to the body and let it react and do what it needs to. So I used to run a ton and I did marathons, and there was one marathon that I hadn't really trained for very much. But I was committed, right? I'm like, no, I'm going to do this marathon. It's going to be epic and amazing. So I kind of played a mental game with myself while I was running and got myself to the finish line, but I went way harder than I normally should have run with that level of training because I was just determined to hit my same consistent finish time even without any training. And I completely ignored my body's signals. For probably the last 10 miles, it felt like someone was sitting and just stabbing into my thighs with a knife as I was running. It wasn't very pleasant, I can tell you. But that pitta nature of mine was determined. I was going to make it to the end. And I was so sick after that race for a solid week to 10 days. Was just in bed and felt as though I had just been hit by a semi-truck. And I knew by about 6 miles into that race that the wise thing to do would have been to probably walk for a bit, run for a bit, walk for a bit, run for a bit, really go slow, and maybe even not try and finish the race. But I was so committed to what I felt like my ego desire was, right? To show that I could do this. It was kind of like proving myself that I totally didn't listen to my soul and instead pushed through. And when we push through fatigue and we don't listen to our bodies, we are violating our own trust. Our body is trying to tell us something. Our body and our emotions are important. They are speaking, and they can only speak when we listen. So by pushing through in this marathon and finishing no matter what, I was actually creating a situation where my body didn't trust me. It was like, we don't know what to do to get your attention. We're trying really hard here. So we're just going to make you so darn sick you can't even get up. So that's what happened after that. Now, let's look at what tells our intellect how to decide, okay? Because our intellect needs information, right? This is that prajna that I mentioned. So our intellect is connected to both our senses, the ego, and the soul, as I mentioned before. Now, both of these aspects of ourselves will send messages to the intellect to help it to make a good decision, right? You got this kind of like powerhouse here in the middle, this prajna, and it needs input. So it's going to get input from a couple different sources to know what to do. The senses give us information, but their information is trying to take us towards pleasure and avoiding any pain at all. The senses just like want to have a party. They want to feel good. They want pleasure. They're all about desire and what's going to feel good to them. It's kind of a survival mechanism, but it's a little bit outdated because most of us are not having to worry about where our next meal is going to come from or being chased by a great big mountain lion. So we have these desires to seek pleasure all the time, but it kind of is an over desire at this point. It is leading us into things like overindulging in food, alcohol, entertainment, sleep, overspending, overeating, over texting, over social mediaing, all the things that entertain our senses. We're tending to do too much of because we're trying to survive, but we're trying to survive when that's not necessary most of the time. Now, the soul, or Atman, sends information to the intellect about what is the most harmonious choice, what's going to be the most balancing and the best for us and the greatest for our life. This is the information that is going to make us evolve into the next level of ourselves. But it is really difficult to hear it because the soul speaks with a whisper, and the ego and the senses scream like a rock party. So the intellect is always having to choose, well, do I seek this pleasure that looks so great? Or do I follow these really tiny whispers of the soul? When I was a kid growing up, we had this little sign in our house that said, easy is hard, hard is easy. And I didn't get it when I was a kid. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Easy is always easy, hard is always hard. As I grew into an adult, we would have conversations about it, and then I understood. You choose the easy thing right now, you get the hard outcome or the hard result later. You choose the easy thing of eating junk food now, you get the hard result later of maybe heartburn, a sick stomach, eventually obesity, maybe diabetes, maybe early death. Okay, so that's definitely a harder way to go. You choose the hard thing now, you get the easy thing later. The hard thing might be eating a big plate full of vegetables if you just don't enjoy them. But the easy thing later is having good cholesterol, no diabetes, good energy, good health, long life, longevity. This can apply to any decision that we make. Might be something good to just write and stick up on your wall, right? Easy is hard, hard is easy. So you choose the hard way now. You listen to the soul now so that you get that end result of the easy way, of the way of harmony, the way of balance. But it starts with that hard choice right now. This applies to conversations too. I remember as a teenager, you tend to not think always before you speak. And let's be honest, most of us do that now too. So if you have a tendency to regret what you say, think about this one. Doing the hard thing now is going to be easier in the long run. So if you're somebody who tends to say yes all the time, if somebody asks a request of you, but then later you wish you hadn't, and so you find some really lame excuse to get out of it, or you even lie, which is a failure of the intellect, you lie later in order to get out of it. Just do the hard thing right now and say, you know what, that's just not going to work for me, or I'm not interested in that. I was one that would get caught up with MLMs really easily, multi-level marketing, because I didn't know how to say no. I just didn't want to hurt someone's feelings. And so I would end up stringing the whole thing along, and eventually I'd have to tell him, no, I'm not interested. But it would have been so much easier if I had just said the hard thing now of, no, I'm not interested, and then had the easy thing later where I got to maintain a good relationship without all that awkwardness of, no, I don't want to buy your product that you're selling me, conversations down the road. Okay, so the ego is very loud and obnoxious. It's kind of like a little kid when they're sitting there going, mom, 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 mom. And eventually you give in just because you can't handle the fight anymore. The senses are servants of the ego. So they are striving to keep the ego happy and satisfied at all times. That's their job. They are his servants. So it often will yell in your ear, eat this, watch this, say this, do this, don't do this, go, go, go. Always be busy, never slow down, never be satisfied. The soul is like a gentle whisper. It's kind of a nudge in the right direction, or a thought that passes through briefly. And if you're not paying attention, you won't even hear it. Most of us are so caught up in the noise of the ego and the noise of the world and distraction, we never even hear the whispers of the soul. We don't even hear our highest self calling to us. Now, I have a life coach I work with. I think everyone should have someone they can talk to and get ideas from and get guidance. And I asked her, well, why are bad habits so easy to fall into? And we work so hard to create these good habits. And then if we miss one day, it is so hard to start again. I had been working really hard on establishing a regular meditation practice, just something simple, just sitting on the side of the bed and meditating for 10 minutes in the morning. And this is back when I was doing my yoga teacher training, and we went on vacation. And it was so hard when I got back to start it again. It was like there were these barriers and these mental blocks, and it was just really, really difficult. So I was asking my life coach about this specifically, and she said, well, if it was easy to always choose the good, best choice, the good habit, then it would take away our freedom to choose. So it's so easy to fall into these bad habits, but when we have to choose the right thing over and over again, that's where we have the growth, the evolution, the overcoming of the ego. It's always going to be harder to choose the right thing, to evolve, to become something greater, and to listen to our soul's voice. But the power that we develop comes from making the right choice over and over again. So change doesn't happen by following the path of least resistance. It's an everyday and every moment decision, which is a little disheartening in some ways because I feel like it should get easier and easier. And I think as we create these habits, they do become easier. I love to work out. I have most of my life since I was about 12. And it is easy for me to exercise every day. That doesn't mean it's not a choice every day. I still have to wake up, and I usually lay my workout clothes out the night before. I go through some of my morning dinacharya, my routines, and it's still a choice. It is still a decision. Am I going to go work out or should I go read instead? Am I going to work out or am I going to get on my email? And I tend to pretty consistently choose the working out before the other things. But it is not something that still is habitual, right? It's not like breathing where I don't have to think about it. I still have to make that good choice every day. This is how yoga and Ayurveda work well together. When we practice yoga and the quieting the mind through yogic practices, not just the asana poses, but all of the yogic practices, it trains our intellect to listen really deep and hear the voice of the soul. When you hear your soul's voice, you realize your connection to divine. You realize that you are part of that, right? This fills you with spiritual energy and power so you have more control over your senses to make a harmonious decision. This is why yoga is so important. Meditation is so important. Being in nature, finding time to be quiet and listen, not having music on all the time, not having the radio going, not always listening to something else. Instead, try listening inside. There's so much wisdom within ourselves that we discount or we don't even hear, because we're letting all the outside voices tell us what we should think, do, be, believe, and spend our time on. So let's start listening a little bit more to our inner voice, okay? Now, the impact on us when we choose from the ego or this Prajnaparadha, when we know the right choice, our soul choice based on experience or promptings, but we make an ego-based choice. Gradually, we see an erosion of our health. Our willpower starts to diminish, our self-esteem, the way that we feel about who we are. We don't trust ourselves. We've made promises, we keep breaking them, and we make a new promise and we keep breaking them. It leads to a lot of feelings of disappointment. We get kind of annoyed and maybe feel hopeless or worthless, like we're never going to get to where we want to be, and we're just stuck in this spin cycle of committing and breaking the commitment and committing and breaking the commitment over and over again. It's important to understand that the greatest battle that you're ever going to wage will be within your own mind. The thoughts that we have are what create the feelings that then lead to our actions and our results. So when we want a certain result and we keep having these actions that are not in alignment, we got to look back and say, what am I thinking about? Where are my thoughts? Whose thoughts am I listening to, the ego or the soul? But the beauty of Prajnaparadha is it's nature's way of giving us a second chance. It's like a wake-up call, right? So every time that we have kind of a wake-up call of, oh, hey, you probably shouldn't have eaten that, now you got gas, or oh my, you probably should have went to bed because now you're exhausted the next day and you can't make good food choices, or oh my goodness, you totally overreacted and freaked out at your coworker. Now you got to go and fix it and solve that problem. Maybe it would have been easier to have not said that or to have said it in a kind, loving way. It's like a tap on the shoulder from nature saying, uh-oh, you have strayed from your path. You have strayed away from your dharma and from nature's plan for you. Now, as long as you're staying off the path, nature is going to keep reminding us. It might be through physical illness. It might be through mental illness. But until we get back on the path, we're going to keep getting these reminders from nature. Now, our journey will be shorter if we continue to ignore the call of nature. So if you don't listen to that soul and that higher voice, and you don't listen to the wake-up call that you're receiving, and you keep ignoring it and buffering it and hiding behind the ego and the senses, you're going to live a shorter life. You will not have the help that you need in order to make it the whole way. So I think that we all want to live to the highest ability. I mean, you wouldn't listen to this podcast if you didn't. So being able to wake up to that is really important. Let's talk about the bright side of all this, how to heal. We have to first, I'm going to give you some steps, okay? We have to first start paying attention to when you feel well, so you know quickly when you don't feel well. We take our health so for granted. I got really sick about a year and a half ago, and I was in bed for probably a week. And I don't get sick that much. I got a lot of kapha. I don't tend to get sick. But I was so sick, and I had no appreciation for how well I normally feel until I was really, really ill. And being aware and noticing when you start to just have little tiny movements away from wellness is very helpful. So when you're having any gas, any bloating, pain in your joints, dry skin, constipation, insomnia, extreme fatigue, anxiety, worry, stress, depression. None of those are your natural healthy state. They are all a wake-up call saying, uh-oh, something needs to change. Let's have a little recalibration here. I had a massage client who said, I don't really think I'm that stressed out of a person, having just come from the doctor and having really high cortisol levels, and her blood sugars were a little out of control. And we were talking through her schedule and her life. And I said, well, you know what? You have just probably gotten used to the level of stress that you're experiencing. You think is normal, but it's actually not normal. It's quite high. So you might need to take some measures to decrease that so you can get yourself back into balance. So if you have gotten used to some of these things as normal, they are not normal, okay? So let's just realize that the absence of disease is not health. We want to have the presence of vitality. That's health. Okay, our second step after we pay attention to how we feel when we're well and start noticing when we're a little bit off is to just be kind and learn to forgive ourselves. We need to not blame others for our choices, but start to take accountability. That's part of being kind because it gives us back power. Let's also look at the impact our choices are having on our lives. So you really got to be honest here. If you do a fake inventory and you're like, oh, I'm doing totally good, everything's fine. Meanwhile, you're running around with like a limb missing. That's how obtuse we can be sometimes about not wanting to take responsibility for our actions or for the results in our lives. Next step is take an inventory of the habits and behaviors that are detracting from your good and happy life. So pretend you're listening to a friend and they're really struggling and they're telling you these changes they want to make. They're like, I really know that I need to eat healthier. Or I know I need to do this better. I need to spend more time with my kids. I need to do this. I'd like to do this. And you wouldn't judge them or act cruelly or be like, oh my gosh, you are such a mess. I don't even want to talk to you because I'm just embarrassed to even know you. So give yourself that same gift, okay? When you honestly look at habits that are separating yourself from your highest, best self, realize that you got to do it with love and compassion, okay? So it's a loving way to do an inventory. Then start pausing before you make a decision and check in. Is this decision going to take me closer or further away from my life purpose or goal? You have an inner strength that will rise up when you give yourself that pause. Your soul, Atma, knows and is always observing and knows what you should be doing. It knows what's best for you. It knows you do not need that candy bar. It knows that you need to stop binge watching Netflix. It knows that you can speak kindly to your spouse when you're having an argument rather than use hurtful words. It knows that you can make these choices that lead you to your best, highest self. So we just have to step aside and let Atman or our soul shine through. It's harder at first, but like we said, hard is easy, right? So choose the hard thing now. And the final thing is respect your intuition. When you get an inspiration to do something that is going to bring you closer to your life purpose, just do it. Don't question it, just do it. And when you get inspiration to not do something that's going to bring you further from your life's purpose, just don't do it. Don't eat the candy bar. There's a moment of choice, right? It didn't jump off the shelf into your mouth. There was something that had to happen. People will say stuff like that to me in appointments. And the clients will say, I just couldn't help myself. I'm like, oh no, there was a moment of choice where you followed the senses and the ego rather than the soul. We always have choice. Here's a thought that really helps me. The me tomorrow will thank the me today for what I did today. This example is really simple, but I do not love washing dishes, but I do it very often, multiple times a day. And at night after dinner, sometimes I just don't want to finish them. I don't want to do the dishes. I don't want to put them away. I don't want to be responsible. I look around and want someone else to come out and be the grown-up. I don't want to be the grown-up anymore. I already cooked the dinner and I bought the dinner. I don't want to also clean up the dinner. But there's no one coming to rescue me. And I realized that the Heather tomorrow will be so grateful to the Heather today for the steps that I take to clean the kitchen so that the Heather tomorrow can come down the stairs and see this beautiful clean kitchen in the morning. And typically that thought will inspire the Heather today to take the right action. And that's something you can apply to anything, right? Does the you tomorrow want to be grateful to the you today for the decision, or will they be sad and disappointed in the you today for that choice? So that's a helpful thing. Now, the bottom line is that having present moment awareness in what we do, think, and say allows us to practice cultivating sattva, right? That higher inner peace, that equanimity. I looked up equanimity because I wasn't sure exactly what it meant, but it means a mental calmness, composure, and evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. We face difficult situations every single day. It's part of our physical, mortal, awesome experience, right? What a gift that we get to face these things and make decisions and have these situations, because that's how we're learning and evolving and growing. But ultimately, our goal is to be very present, to be in this moment and to live it in a sattvic, peaceful state. We're seeking for that equanimity, that calmness, composure, having an even temper, even in a difficult situation. The solution is not as hard as we make it, right? We kind of make it like this big deal that, oh my gosh, I'm going to be perfect someday. And I used to watch that show Dharma and Greg, and I was always like, oh, I'm going to be just like Dharma and be so peaceful and whatever, realizing that, oh my gosh, I have so much pitta fire. That's never going to happen. But the things that I do on a daily basis, the habits that I've created, my dinacharya, really support me through this. It's things like meditating, being in nature, eating prana-rich whole foods, sleeping well and at the right times, not overscheduling your life so that you're frenetic and you're in that rajasic high energy state all the time, and move your body with intention, right? Be grateful, go practice some yoga, do walking, exercise, but do it in a loving way, not a punishing way where you're trying to reform or fix something that's wrong with you. Now, we understand that Prajnaparadha is the path of least resistance. Following these crimes against the wisdom, failing to do what we know is in our best highest interest is easy. And we're going to choose the hard because we know that choosing the hard is going to lead to the easy down the road. And we want that balanced, harmonious, peaceful life. So I hope that this week you can go out and choose the hard. And in every situation go, is this going to be an easy thing or a hard thing? And I'm going to choose the hard because I want the easy down the road. Have a beautiful week. Keep practicing loving yourself as you work through this. I will list all of these steps that I talked about on how to heal yourself and to start listening to your soul's voice in the show notes so that you can maybe write those down, be a great journaling exercise. Hope you have a beautiful week. We'll talk to you very soon. Namaste. Before you go, was this episode helpful for you? Well, the most helpful thing you can do in return is to leave a review in iTunes. The reviews are what keep the podcast going. And be sure to subscribe and share this episode if you loved it. You can connect with me online at ayurvedalifeschool.com, on Instagram at Ayurveda Life School, and on Facebook at Heather White Johnson. Have a beautiful day. Namaste.